Hi, everybody. This is Jason Rosenbaum, a politics correspondent with St. Louis Public Radio, and it is time for another episode of Missouri Mailbag. This edition was inspired by WWE megastar, Knox County Tennessee mayor, and Pike County native, Glenn Kane Jacobs. Jacobs took time out of feuding with his kayfabe brother, The Undertaker, to visit the Missouri Capitol in support of getting rid of Missouri's income tax. And his presence in Jefferson City inspired me to put a garish post on Facebook asking you all for your hottest takes on Missouri politics. Get it? Because Kane can summon fire like a Final Fantasy character. In any case, you all did not disappoint because you gave me some of the most blistering and thermonuclear takes that I can handle, and I'm going to respond to them right now. Former State Representative Tony Lavasco writes, "Lobbyists are a mirror of what the legislature will tolerate and are ultimately only as good or evil as the sum of the people whose votes they solicit." When we talk about lawyers representing people, most people who understand the legal profession separate the actual attorney from the causes or clients they end up representing. And no matter how bad or evil or despicable somebody is, they still have a constitutional right to a legal defense. And you could look at lobbying in a similar manner. People who take on clients are upholding the First Amendment right for people or groups to present grievances to their governments. And sure, you can hold it against somebody for taking a client that you may personally find reprehensible. It's up for lawmakers to decide whether the lobbyist's argument is good or bad and decide accordingly whether they're going to vote for something that's within the interest of the client somebody's lobbying for. The JC supermajority will be broken. So what the representative is referring to is that currently Republicans have what are known as supermajorities in the Missouri House and Senate. That is enough members to override a hypothetical gubernatorial veto. And I'm just going to be really honest here. As long as there is a Republican chief executive, I think the supermajority is much more symbolic than it is practical. In the Jay Nixon era, not having a supermajority was genuinely impactful for Republicans because they would need Democrats to cross over to override a Democratic governor's veto. I don't think Democrats are going to be in charge of the governor's mansion unless they can figure out the vaunted geographic problem that I've been talking about for years. But I do think it gives Democrats something to work toward. There is kind of this emerging consensus in Democratic politics in Missouri that just trying to win statewide races is kind of a waste of energy and a waste of time until Democrats can show strength in places they need to win statewide races. So breaking the Republican supermajority in 2026 or 2028, I think are probably more grabbable goals at this point in time. My hot take is something no one cares about. Missouri's county form of government is outdated and nonsensical. Why are the coroner, sheriff, treasurer, recorder of deeds, clerk, and auditor elected positions? Why have 3 commissioners? We have a system that rewards people on their political views on gun rights and abortion rather than their actual experience, education, and skills to do the job. I agree with Bob Miller. There is no reason to have elected coroners throughout the state when that is a very specific job that should necessitate and demand specific expertise. I think you could make an argument that sheriffs shouldn't be elected either. I do want to talk, though, about Bob Miller's last point, and that is how non sequitur issues often propel people to becoming county elected officials. And I have to say, he's 100% right on that. And it's not just Republicans who are riding antipathy toward gun control and abortion rights to winning seats on rural county commissions. The best example I can provide is St. Louis County. I think that there are a lot of voters in St. Louis County who may have picked Democrat Steve Stenger in 2014 because they just couldn't vote for a Republican in Rick Stream. And they really regret that decision, given that Stenger went to jail for committing crimes, and Stream is still the Republican elections director in St. Louis County, and is, along with Eric Fay, runs an entity that is universally seen as well-functioning and innovative. I think that the partisan patterns in St. Louis County voting really backfired in that situation. And I think it really should serve as a lesson that you should pick a candidate based on their track record in county-based issues, or at least what they're going to do in county-based issues, rather than just a reflexive D or R next to their name. You can still vote against a Republican because their views on county issues are just too wacky and extreme for you. But I am kind of tired of the non sequiturs in county politics, and I think that we need to get back to basics, as a certain citywide official in St. Louis said recently. St. Louis must get an NFL team to make a rebound. It should spend all $750 million settlement funds figuring out how. Look, I love the NFL. I'm still watching professional football, even though Stan Kroenke dastardly yanked the St. Louis Rams and moved them to Inglewood, California. I share the disdain for how that horrible process went. I covered that process. I won sports journalism awards for covering that process. There are a few reasons why I have to disagree with Mike Carter here. Number one, I don't think the NFL is ever going to let a team come back to St. Louis. We've already lost 2 teams. It really strikes me as unlikely they're going to welcome St. Louis back with open arms when they've already relocated twice. Number two, I think that the amount of money it's going to require to bring an NFL team here is going to be well over $750 million. It's going to be several billion dollars. And whoever decides to propose an NFL stadium or team here is going to ask for state, county, and probably city money, which I think the appetite for is really questionable. And number three, and I understand people in St. Louis are going to just roll their eyes at this point, but we should really focus on getting an NBA team or a WNBA team to the Gateway City. I know that people in this town think professional basketball is a lesser than sport than MLB or NHL. You all are totally wrong. The NBA is arguably the biggest sport, or one of the biggest sports in the world, next to soccer. The marketability of some of the athletes is unbelievable. And there is a rich basketball history in St. Louis that I think would draw enough interest to support an NBA team. If we can't get an NBA team, the WNBA is really ascendant right now. The sport is incredibly exciting to watch, with some generational players that are competing now at a really high level. I think that's doable, especially since NBA champion Jason Tatum wants to bring a WNBA team here. So that should be the focus, not an NFL team. My good friend Bob McMahon writes, is there any way we can stop the Missouri legislature voting to undo referendums passed by the public? It's infuriating. There are a couple of ways that voters could counteract what the legislature is doing. With constitutional amendments that were passed, say, in 2024, the only way to really change them is by having another statewide vote and trying to undo them through a statewide election. If you're really mad at the legislature for trying to undo protections for abortion rights, or let's just say They try to undo the sports betting initiative. Vote against what they put on the ballot. The other thing that I think could be done hypothetically, especially when we're talking about statutory changes like the paid sick leave and minimum wage initiative, is there is a proposal that would make it harder for the legislature to undo specific voter-approved initiatives. It would be in the Constitution. It's not something the legislature could change without, I guess, another initiative petition. And that has been proposed as an idea. It remains to be seen whether that's going to get enough monetary support and enough organizational support to go on the ballot. I will just say this about Proposition A, which is the minimum wage and paid sick leave measure. If the legislature does end up just gutting that initiative, just like completely repealing, especially the paid sick leave part, what's to stop unions and activists and people that supported that initiative from getting the signatures to put that on the ballot in 2026 as a constitutional amendment? And then the legislature would be in the same box that they are with Amendment 3, the Abortion Rights Initiative, where they would have to put something else on the ballot to stop its implementation. I actually think from a strategic standpoint, legislators may be playing with fire here by going after Proposition A, because that was a very well-organized effort, and there is nothing stopping them from organizing behind a more permanent paid sick leave plan that the legislature will not be able to undo. It's time to take a second look at Better Together. There were some issues that needed to be ironed out, and the super mayor needs to be rethought, but ultimately it would be better for St. Louis County, St. Louis City, Greater St. Louis, and yes, the state, if you had one united St. Louis and not 90 municipalities. I am so glad Reese brought this up. The idea of some sort of city-county combination is a favorite issue of mine to discuss and to pose to elected officials. And I use that term very specifically because I do think there is a difference between like the city rejoining the county as a municipality and the city and the county merging into one government that oversees what is now the city of St. Louis and what is now St. Louis County. That is basically what the Better Together plan in 2019 was. And Reese is very correct. Like, there were a lot of problems with that proposal. I think that giving Steve Stanger unbelievable power over the region's affairs and government, I think conceptually made sense because especially the city of St. Louis has a history with relatively weak executive power. I think that giving that power specifically to Steve Stanger really turned a lot of people off to the idea of having a super powerful executive in charge of the region. But I do think there are some really solid arguments to be made that having 2 recorders of deeds, 2 police departments, 2 license collectors, or 2 revenue collectors really doesn't make a lot of sense and could probably be done more efficiently if there was just one county government doing a lot of those services. But no matter how good of a case you make, it doesn't really matter if you win an intellectual argument. It's about convincing voters, particularly in the city and the county, that it's a good idea. And there have been a lot of proposals over the last decades trying to end the great divorce in St. Louis and St. Louis County, and they've all failed because they didn't have political buy-in and they didn't have the buy-in of the residents that they would affect the most. A man who appeared in the ill-fated imaginary sitcom Raj and the Gorilla writes, "The St. Louis region should move to a borough system. The city-county line is imaginary, and Maplewood-Richmond Heights have more in common with Southwest City than Southwest City has to do with most of the rest of the city. The same is true in near North County and North City." This is a pretty good point. that this anonymous commenter has presented to me. I don't really think there is a lot of tangible differences between my home in Richmond Heights and, say, the neighborhoods around Forest Park. They're very similar in their political views. They're similar in kind of how they are laid out, although I don't live in a stately mansion that overlooks the park. I would say that this is the same issues of trying to resurrect Better Together. Until you can convince city and county voters that something like a borough system similar to New York City is in their best interest, it doesn't matter if you win the intellectual argument, it's never going to happen. Eastside karaoke champion Jason G. writes, "No seersucker suits allowed in the legislature until they accept the will of the constituents." This is similar to what Bob wrote to me, but I do want to talk about seersucker suits. For people that may not be aware, in the 2010s, there was this emergent trend in the Missouri Senate where senators wore seersucker suits or outfits every Wednesday. And there was a clear divide in the Senate between lawmakers that dove headfirst into this trend and others who frankly found it to be really stupid. Our good friend, former State Senator Ryan McKenna, actually had an amendment that basically banned seersucker suits because, and I'm paraphrasing here, they look ridiculous and they shouldn't be worn by people who are not 10 years old. I have to be very honest, I almost got sucked into the seersucker suit craze of the 2010s. There were points in time I was going to buy a seersucker suit only to wear to the Missouri Senate. And when I thought about it, I was like, that's a waste of money. I'm more of kind of a monochromatic person when it comes to suits. And I guess I just decided to wear pink often because I am still living in the early 2000s when pink was a cool color for dudes to wear. My good friend Scott Charton writes, "The likelihood of a major earthquake, likely plural, centered in southeast Missouri, a literal earthquake, not a socio-political one, is increasing, experts say. The resulting casualties and property loss/damage will be profound, and it will affect government politics and life across the state in ways both sudden and long-lasting. Slow, costly recovery will be mixed with finger-pointing about preparedness and disaster management/response. Economic as well as sociological impacts will be severe and will make the pandemic upheaval seem minor by comparison. Mix in conspiracy nuttiness, eroded trust in science and institutions, plus man's inhumanity to man. Hot take on a hot mess." So what Scott is talking about is the fact that southeast Missouri is on a literal fault line, the New Madrid fault line. In the early 1800s, there was a huge earthquake in the New Madrid fault line zone, and there are legends that it was so strong that it rang church bells in the northeast part of the United States. I'm not sure if that's actually true or just apocryphal, but these were really strong earthquakes. The only thing I think that prevented these earthquakes from killing thousands of people is that back in 1812, Missouri was not particularly well populated, and it was still kind of frontiersy, so to speak. While southeast Missouri is not the most densely populated part of Missouri, there are well-established towns that are pretty close to the New Madrid Fault. Cape Girardeau is a very well put together city. I would say it's one of the most well put together cities in what's considered outstate Missouri in the entire state. And Memphis, Tennessee is not that far away from New Madrid County, New Madrid, Missouri. It's not out of the question that the earthquake could be so huge, it could go up the Mississippi River and affect part of the St. Louis area. We just don't know. I did talk to one of my friends who is from Southeast Missouri, and she did tell me that when she was a kid, earthquake preparedness in Southeast Missouri was a common part of the educational curriculum. So I do think there are institutions in Southeast Missouri that take earthquake preparedness really seriously. I just don't know if there's really going to be anything that can be done short of like earthquake proofing thousands of buildings that will prevent widespread property damage or loss of life when this earthquake happens. There's a really good article in The Atlantic about it. I'm posting the screenshot right here. Google it and read all about it.